Sri Lanka's president fled his residence before thousands of protesters stormed the building. Demonstrators are calling for his resignation as the country deals with its worst economic crisis in decades.
Russian troops lay the Ukrainian town of Barvinkova to waste as Washington promises another bumper aid package and evacuations continue from Donetsk.
Thousands of angry protesters in Sri Lanka have stormed the president's official residence in its capital. The crowds waved flags and chanted slogans such as "Go to go home," referring to the country's president by his nickname. According to Sri Lankan officials, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled before the protesters stormed his residence, and the country's prime minister has called for an emergency government meeting. The island nation is struggling with its worst economic crisis since it gained independence in 1948. Its severe foreign exchange shortage has limited its imports of essential items. The protesters blame the country's president for the economic crisis and are calling for his resignation.
As the race to become the next British Prime Minister gathers pace, a number of MPs have thrown their hat into the ring, promising to restore trust, rebuild the economy and reunite the country. And after a spectacular exit from government less than a week ago, former Chancellor Rishi Sunak announced his bid with a video posted on social media. Another favourite to replace Johnson, the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, has ruled himself out of the leadership contest. Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt, a favourite with the bookies, and Foreign Secretary Liz Truss are also expected to launch their campaign soon. Tom Tugendhat, the chair of the Commons Foreign Affairs Select Committee, is another hopeful.
After having a kind of exciting Prime Minister, the Conservative Party will probably want somebody who's a bit less exciting. I mean, in fact, compared with Boris Johnson, almost any of the candidates on office would be a bit less exciting. But less exciting, but competent. I think what they need now is somebody who will appear competent, can make the government sort of clear out the stables a bit, make it seem like a more normal Conservative government leading the country.
Members of the influential 1922 committee want the successor for Boris Johnson in Downing Street by the beginning of September, when MPs return to Westminster and just ahead of the party conferences.
Tributes and condolences have been pouring in from around the world after Japan's longest-serving leader, Shinzo Abe, was fatally shot on Friday at a political rally. India and Nepal have announced one day of national mourning as a mark of respect. Residents and news media lined the streets as the hearse carrying Abe's body left his home in Tokyo on Saturday. This resident says he had contributed and could have contributed so much more to the country. This would be a great loss for Japan. This man says it is unbelievable to see an attack like this in very safe Japan. It is unbelievable that someone was walking around with a gun like that. The alleged gunman, who was in police custody, has admitted shooting the former Prime Minister and says he was harbouring a grudge. Speaking at the G20 summit in Indonesia, Joseph Borrell, the EU's foreign policy chief, offered his sympathies.
Well, we are all shocked. Abe was the most long-standing minister of Japan, a good friend of Europe. He contributed a lot to the friendship between Japan and the European Union and to the world progress and stability.
US President Joe Biden called the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida to offer his outrage and sadness. He also visited the Japanese ambassador and signed the condolence book before making the statement.
I'd like to say just a very few words about the horrific, shocking killing of my friend, Japanese Prime Minister Abe. I'm keeping his wife and family in my prayers, and the United States is standing in solidarity with our ally Japan.
Meanwhile, in New York City, the UN Security Council held a minute of silence for the assassinated former leader, and for Angola's former president, José Eduardo dos Santos, who died on Friday after a prolonged illness. US President Joe Biden has signed an executive order to ease access to abortion services. After the Supreme Court's decision last month to overturn Roe v. Wade, the Democrats pleaded with the leader to take action. The measure will have limited influence as each state has a right to enforce their own reproductive laws. However, the president says change is possible if voters elect more pro-choice lawmakers.
When tens of millions of women vote this year, they won't be alone. Millions and millions of men will be taking up the fight alongside them to restore the right to choose and the broader right to privacy. in this nation, which they denied existed. And the challenge from the court to the American women and men, this is a nation. The challenge is go out and vote. Well, for God's sake, there's an election in November. Vote, 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 vote.
The mandate attempts to shield mobile clinics on state borders that have banned or heavily restricted termination and increase access to so-called abortion pills in emergency care. But protesters in New Orleans say the new decree hasn't gone far enough and are calling on Biden to do more. The US has promised to send its 15th aid package worth €392 million in military equipment to Ukraine. The announcement comes as two-thirds of Barvinkov in the Kharkiv region have been reduced to rubble after relentless Russian shelling. Despite heavy warnings from the town's mayor, some residents have returned home after a mass evacuation 2 months ago. This man says, "Where do I go? Name at least one safe place here, where they don't shoot. If we leave for somewhere else, they will still use rockets and fly there." Meanwhile, the exodus in the eastern Donbass region continues after invading forces killed 6 people and injured 21 in incessant strikes. The governor of Donetsk says some 300 civilians are leaving on evacuation trains every day. This resident from Slavyansk says, "We waited too long, but finally I decided to save my children and myself. There was shelling by every weapon that exists. Even children now know all their names." According to the International Organization for Migration and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, more than 6 million Ukrainians have been internally displaced. Bulgaria could be returning to the polls again, the 4th time in little more than a year. Prime Minister-designate Arsene Vasilev was given 1 week to try end the political crisis, but failed to secure enough support to form a majority in Parliament. While 119 lawmakers have agreed to back Vasilev, who is the co-chair of the pro-Western We Continue the Change party, he says he hopes to gather more seats in an upcoming election. The world's richest man, Elon Musk, has announced he is terminating his €43 billion Twitter deal. The Telsa CEO says the social media platform has failed to live up to its potential as a platform for free speech and has breached multiple provisions of the merger agreement. But Twitter isn't accepting Musk's declaration and is determined to close a transaction on the price and terms Mr. Musk agreed to. It plans to pursue legal action to enforce the sale.
No one was gored during the 3rd bull run of Pamplona's San Fermin festival. Thousands of trail seekers participate in the famous runs that usually last around 2.5 minutes. At least 7 men were taken to the hospital after Saturday's run. However, the 6 Spaniards and 1 Frenchman were not seriously injured. Others were stomped over by the half-dozen bulls and the 6 oxen that are used in the festival.
Fire departments are under strain in the south of France after several wildfires broke out in the Gard and Bouches-du-Rhône regions. At least 650 hectares of land have been destroyed, while Meteo France has placed the area on maximum alert. Hundreds of firefighters were dispatched to battle the flames, but wind and high temperatures are making operations difficult. A spokesperson for the department says the team hope to have the blaze under control by Sunday. At the Museum of European and Mediterranean Civilizations in Marseille, the Pharaoh's Superstars exhibition brings together more than 300 pieces from the greatest European collections to highlight, between history and legends, the posthumous notoriety of the kings and queens of ancient Egypt. While some have become true icons of popular culture, such as Cleopatra or Tutankhamun, others have been completely forgotten. A fantastic journey of 5,000 years to discover the first superstars of humanity. Using loans from European museums such as the Vatican, Louvre, Hermitage, Prado and Uffizi museums, this exhibition will give viewers an unprecedented opportunity to appreciate the breadth of Renaissance artist Raphael's skill and creativity. Through some of his most celebrated paintings and drawings, the viewer is also introduced to his work in architecture, poetry and designs for sculpture, tapestry and prints. A master to rediscover if you are in London this July. The Maxi Collection's grand new exhibition, an innovative itinerary that brings together major installations by 15 international artists, includes key works from the compilation and others commissioned for the occasion. The visionary gaze of the artists evokes our time, full of uncertainties and challenges, but also the various human and technological possibilities that will propel this generation into the future.